So, welcome to the Keenan Yoga Podcast. Today I am with Talia Sutra, founder of the yoga school Love and All Is Coming. I've seen Talia online a while back and started to follow her, and I really liked her stuff. So I wanted, although she's not Ashtanga, of course we don't always have Ashtanga people on, I wanted to come on and welcome Talia to the podcast.
Hi, Adam. Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, you're one of the exceptions of people that get through the net of non-Ashtanga people, and it's lovely to have you. And you're, and to that end, your stuff is really refreshing, and is varied and different. And I really kind of am curious to find out more about you. So the obvious place to start: where did you start? How did your journey of yoga begin? Because I know it's an interesting one from your childhood.
Yeah, it began with my mom. So when my mom was diagnosed with lymphoma for the first time, she began practicing yoga. I was about 6 years old. And that was my first introduction to it. Although my whole life, I grew up in a very spiritual home. My parents are really beautiful, lovely people who both come from families that have a deep connection to ritual and practice in their own way, obviously not related to what I now practice and teach. But of course, in a kind of like zoomed out way, it does, but not in the details. So I've always had a deep connection to ritual and prayer and connecting with the heart, the divine. And when my mom started practicing yoga, then it was also just seeing asanas every day just became a normal thing. So that was my first introduction to yoga. And I would say my interest it wasn't too strong in terms of like my mom, she would always try and get me to be involved with what she's doing. But I wasn't too interested. I thought it was a little bit slow and boring. And I was very physical, but I preferred doing the gymnastics that I was doing at the time.
Did you mention where you were at this time? Where's home? Yeah.
So I was born in Tiberias, which is a very small city in northern Israel. My dad was the mayor there for nearly 15 years. So before I was born, and when I was born, I was already like well established. That's what my dad was doing. So my family was very well known, and that's the reality that I was born into. So as soon as I can remember myself, it was just a very social upbringing. There were always people around. Everyone knew me. It seemed that everyone knew me and my family. My parents were very active people. And everyone, when my mom was sick, also everyone knew about it. It was discussed, and it was everyone. So she also became an activist. So when she was sick, also another thing that she did besides, Hatha yoga is like a karma yogi. She set up organizations to help people with cancer, especially women. And even as a really sick person, going through chemo and being so weak and depleted and losing her hair, everything, she would go around visiting cancer patients in hospitals and bring them flowers and cheer them up and teach them yogic techniques. So it was really impressive. And I learned a lot from her. Like that was really the most important thing that I learned from a young age, that whatever happens to us, and this is what my mom always shared with us too, as a mother, even to a 6-year-old, she really always spoke to me like, it doesn't matter what happens, it's how we respond. It doesn't matter what's going on. Like I didn't choose to be sick, and no one chooses that, but I can choose how I respond. And she never lost her beauty or sense of humor and her connection with people. And even though it was very public, it was a very public way, obviously relatively, but it's a public way to be so sick. And she handled it so beautifully. And obviously, she had it two different times, but she defeated the cancer both times, and she's in remission now for many years. So she's
Brilliant.
thriving, and still, she teaches. She's always been. She started out as a physical education teacher when she was 20, and then she went on to with yoga and continue. She still essentially teaches different modalities of physical education, but she's really inspired by teaching people to use their bodies, to generate well-being. And I learned that from her from a young age. She still does this now. She's 63. And every day she has a practice that she does. And she motivates my dad and motivates essentially the whole neighborhood to do, to get up and to breathe, to move, to stretch. And she teaches yoga and Pilates and so many different kinds of movements. She's always learning too, to inspire other people.
When did you move to New York then? Because I thought you were brought up in New York, right?
Yeah.
How did that transpire? Yeah.
My dad essentially had option. It all had to do with my dad's line of work. So he didn't want to stay in politics anymore for obvious reasons. I think for, like I said, very God-loving people, politics just doesn't go together. My dad really wanted to make an impact for people, and I think he did. Both of my parents are like these kind of karma yogis, you could say. They take action to help other people. But the next step for him would be to go and work at a bigger place, maybe in Jerusalem or something else. And knowing what he did, it's the political world is a very corrupt place, no matter where you are in the world. And he just didn't want that. So we took on, instead, he agreed to take on a kind of government, like a diplomatic mission to go abroad. And we decided, or he got the chance to go to New York, and it was supposed to be for a few years, and maybe we go somewhere else. But we ended up in New York for 7 years as a family. And I was just starting 5th grade. So I was maybe 10, something like that. That's when I moved to New York, and I stayed there until I was 17. So that part of my schooling, pretty like major part, was in New York. And then I moved back to Israel with my family, because it was never like they made a permanent move. It was this part of his work, and then he ended it and he wanted to come back. And I ended up going to the American International School in Israel. So I was still in this kind of American education bubble. I didn't know many Israelis. And so it was a bit, like people are always confused. It's like, where are you from? Especially when they meet my family, because everyone is like sounds more Israeli. So I guess it really depends. But the way that I grew up, yeah, it's a bit confusing. But I immediately went afterwards, after I finished my high school levels in Israel, but in an American system. I went back to New York immediately. So I left. So I wasn't with my family anymore, and I stayed in New York until I was about 27 or 28. So for a while.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as long as you've got warmer clothes, I suppose you're okay. What were you studying at the time? Arts, some kind of arts, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was doing fine arts. So I was at the School of Visual Arts, and I was doing fine arts. I only did it for a year. I dropped out and started teaching yoga, essentially.
Right.
Yeah.
I suppose we need to talk a bit about yoga. So, what was your? You were into dance and gymnastics and then dance, right? And then you were. Was it interested in Dharma Mitra? Did you get into yoga through Dharma Mitra? Is that right?
No.
Okay.
No. You need make better listening to the podcast.
Okay, fine, great.
No. So I was studying at School of Visual Arts. I was doing fine arts, and I lived on 8th Street in St. Mark's. And every day I would pass by, I would like walk up towards the subway, and I'd see like a line of people, like a huge line. And I couldn't understand why every day at the same time there's like a line around the block. So I started, just to ask people what's going on. And they said, this is like just a yoga studio. I was so confused because when I used to go with my mom to yoga classes, like no one was there. It was like 3 people. And this was like a major street in New York City, and so many people, young people, trying to get in. So I was like very intrigued. And I decided to just one day go inside, and like try it. And this is the studio called Yoga to the People. It's not there anymore, but it was like such I think a moment in New York, and it was a beautiful place. It was like a sanctuary for a lot of people. So it was on St. Mark's, 4 floors of huge loft spaces. And you have to imagine this staircase filled with people, maybe in certain times of the day, like 100 people inside the building in the stairway trying to get into one of the studios. And inside the studio, teachers calling, okay, we're moving into 8s. And that means you're moving into 8 mats per row. Okay, we're moving into 10, because they're trying to fill as many people as possible in these rooms, sometimes up to 80 people per room. And of course, there were so many people because the classes were essentially free. You don't have to pay. And if people paid, it could be anything.
I thought that, right. I got confused because I heard the story about the lines, and then I thought, oh, something that was Dharma Mitra place. I think maybe glitch in the podcast or something, and it kind of came back. Right. So it was, I taught yoga for the people in Vancouver, which was a donation-based studio.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, it's in Vancouver. You'd have loads of people in the class, and then you get to the charity box at the end, and you kind of think, oh, that's not very good. Oftentimes. Maybe. And you started teaching at that studio yourself. Is that how your journey transpired? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I started to practice there, and very quickly I did the training that they offered there, and I started teaching immediately. I dropped out of school to continue teaching, and then they had 2 types of studios. They had these vinyasa studios where they were donation based, and then they also had the hot yoga studios. So essentially, I was practicing immediately. When I started practicing there, I immediately also started practicing the hot yoga, which is, for people who don't know, it's a set sequence of 26 postures and 2 breathing exercises. It's known as Bikram yoga. Bikram is the man, Bikram Chowdhury, and that's his style of yoga. It originates from an 84 posture sequence from Vishnu Ghosh. Most people don't know him. He's the younger brother of Paramahansa Yogananda. So it's a Kolkata-based, very interesting Kolkata-based sequence that most people just don't know. Anyway, I started practicing this very intensely right away. And then I was just told to start teaching it. And I started teaching it. There was no official training or something like this. I was just told to teach, and I started to teach this style of practice. And that's really what the basis of, I guess, what I've been teaching for the past almost 15 years. It's still based on this Ghosh style, the 26, the 84, the way that I practice.
You've added more postures.
No, I don't add. It's not mine.
No, I mean not just the 24, because that would be a bit limiting. So you've expanded out towards the 86 a bit more.
So there's 26 postures in the original practice that most people know. And what most people don't know about this Bikram world is that there is actually, it would be interesting for Ashtangis, because you guys could appreciate how there's like, oh, there's a surprise. Here's a new postures to learn. So there is actually a kind of by teacher invitation. So when a teacher sees a student, let's say in this style of yoga long enough, they'll invite you to the advanced practice. And it's the set sequence of 84 postures they're done in a specific order. So most people don't know that. But that's what I practiced for many, many years, along with my friends in New York. And what I teach and what I practice is based on this classic 84 posture sequence from the Ghost tradition.
That is really interesting. I didn't honestly know that there was the expansive 80. I knew it was Bishu Ghosh who and Chowdhury that there was a relationship there, but I didn't know that. That's real. That's really helpful, actually. Well, I don't know helpful because I don't practice the sequence, but very interesting nevertheless. How did your teaching expand from there? I suppose because nowadays you travel all over the world teaching workshops. How have you expanded from there, or how can you say anything about how your teaching's grown, or what's motivated you? You have this tagline, "Love is all is coming." That doesn't immediately resonate with the Bikram message for outsiders looking in, at least.
Sure.
So,
I mean, I just want to say I was very blessed that even though too, from, I'm sure Ashtangis can also relate to people judging the practice based on certain history with the teachers, the main teachers. And I think that is something that needs to be separated, because the practice itself is not necessarily contaminated by the people who have flaws, the people who have brought it into a certain light and helped to popularize it, or even invent it in some ways. They are human, and they can hold certain flaws, and those flaws can come to light when working, especially with so many people. But the practice itself is not contaminated. And I think it's important to make that distinction. So I was lucky because I wasn't teaching in Bikram studios. And there was a big lawsuit around that time. Some people listening might remember or know that was with the school that I was teaching for. So I was teaching for a school that wasn't a Bikram studio. And Bikram had a problem with it because Greg Gamuccio, who was the owner, was previously like his right-hand man. And essentially, there's a big drama there. It doesn't matter. But he opened his own studios because it's like a can of worms, like starting to talk about this. But he opened his own studios. Bikram Chowdhury sued. And anyway, he lost the lawsuit that said that you could copyright a sequence of postures. He lost the case. So then everyone was able to continue teaching this. Anyway, I think your question was how I expanded the teaching. I was teaching a lot. So I was probably, from the moment I started, about 21 years old until I was 27. I probably never took a day off, unless the studios were closed because it was Christmas or a holiday. I never took a day off. I taught probably 5 classes a day on average. So I would start at like 6 a.m. teaching the first class and end maybe like 10 p.m. And I loved it. This is what I wanted to do. I was like thrilled. This was my dream, and I was doing it. I was so happy. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. And I was just so happy to be living my absolute dream. So I didn't know at the time that I wasn't trying to do anything else. I just have to say that. Like, I wasn't trying to make something, or I was just teaching many, many classes, because I had a lot of friends in between the Bikram world and the non-Bikram world. Many people started to notice my practice. I was in New York City. New York City is a kind of intense place. And I was in New York. People started to notice that my practice is very strong practice. And I think Ashtangis could relate to this, like, because it's a set sequence and it's a community. So even though I wasn't teaching for Bikram people eventually get to know the practitioners that are strong, especially because there were also championships. And it's a whole other thing. And a lot of people don't know this, but there were Asana Championships taking place in the US. They didn't originate in the US. It's actually quite an Indian thing. And they,
Yeah.
in India, it's a huge thing. And they're very proud
Still
of it.
now. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still. I follow
Yeah.
so many of my Instagram friends from India are like amazing asana champions. And anyway, I was like the least, I still am. I'm not like act like naturally in my nature competitive. If I get intense about something, it's because I just like love it so much and I can't stop doing it. I'm not competitive by nature. I'm too sensitive in some ways for that. And I'm also not social enough. I don't really like to be around a lot of people. But my good friend Jared McCann, he was, an asana champion, and he it just was really encouraging me. He's like, please just do it. Just do it as a joke. Just do it as a joke, And I was like, fine. I'm not gonna like create like a a stubborn identity against it, because I think that that is a problem, like when someone is like, come on, just do it. It will be fun. We'll do it together. I didn't want to say no out of like some kind of judgment, or I don't know. So I did it. I did do the championships. I met even more Bikram people, more teachers, fantastic teachers like Mary Jarvis, who is very well known in that world. I learned a lot. I started even going out and speaking about yoga. Somehow I found myself speaking about yoga on national TV in the US, doing live television. Like, it's like, how did all of this happen? And that one thing led to another. Then there was social media. My brother was telling me to get social media at the time. So I downloaded Instagram, and it kind of got the ball rolling. A combination of both having a strong practice, very strong practice, many intensive community in New York City, and also because of the championships that I did once, but I won. I didn't mean to do it, or I was like absolutely shocked that it happened. But because I got a certain title in this world, they started putting me out there in the world, like pushing me out in magazines and TV shows to talk about yoga. But it wasn't, I never would have taken that action. So everywhere that any place I got to is because someone kind of asked me or like suggested,
Mm.
like my friend Jared, or later it was another student who became my friend Nusha, who said, yeah, you need to do not only social media, you need to do retreats. And let me introduce you to this guy. He's going to be your manager. He's going to make sure that you're well represented.
Right.
So people came into my life and started suggesting what I should do. It wasn't necessarily immediately my
Right.
something that I was able to do by myself. Basically, social media gave me, I've always been an artistic person, and I love to write, and I love to create images, and that gave me the opportunity to do that. So I was writing a lot, and one of the things that I was writing is Love and All Is Coming. Obviously, I adjusted practice and all is coming a little bit. I'm so sorry for the Ashtangis
Yes,
who
you did
find this.
actually, didn't you? Yeah, that's a point. Yeah. I didn't think about
Sorry
that.
if it's offensive.
Yeah.
For some of the more religious Ashtangis. But that actually, I was just writing that. I was writing that a lot on social media, and it captured a lot of people's minds or hearts immediately. It was like one of those things that people could immediately like get, and it kind of grew. It grew, and people started using it and making it a hashtag, and it grew. And then when I decided to teach workshops internationally, and I was invited to come places, then I would use that as the name of what I was teaching. And I guess I know I'm kind of going on tangents. I just want to answer all the questions that you asked. You asked what I was teaching. So in the Classic 84, I mean, there's a lot in there. There's every type of asana you can imagine. A lot of overlapping actually with the
Yeah,
asanas that you
I see
practice.
that. Yeah, yeah.
But there were a lot of backbending asanas, and my friends that I was practicing with would always complain about their pain. And I said, you shouldn't have pain. Actually, there should be no pain when you do this. And that's where my focus on backbending technique evolved. It started there from observing my friends who were these amazing, like incredible practitioners. And for some reason, their backbending in the process and afterwards would cause them pain. And I was very interested in then beginning to observe what I was doing, what other people were doing, what the differences were, and how I could help
Mm,
teach what I know, what works for me
mm,
at least, you know, and
mm,
see if it helps others. And over the years, I started developing essentially a method that I teach and that I have been teaching for probably around 8 years now. And I've seen the results have been amazing to see because so many of my students would tell me, I do this, I have no pain. I have no pain.
mm,
Wow, like that's amazing. And that is where I started to specialize. I started to specialize in backbending workshops, and I would take it in different places. And then in 2018, I decided to focus my time more on developing a 200-hour training, and and that's what I've been doing ever since. It took a while
mm,
to really figure out how I wanted to do it and what I was going to focus on, and then building it from the ground up. But now I've been, offering them for several years, and that was the natural progression. But it was never foreseen by me. When my friends used to ask me to like even like make a video, like they were way more
mm.
ahead of the time. My friend would hold a phone and say like, okay, explain how to do standing bow pulling pose. And I'd say, oh my God, no, turn the camera off. I was so shy and it was so hard for me to I would have never imagined doing what I do now because it's so public and there's so much public speaking, and I was painfully like a shy person, and it was so intense to
Mm.
even imagine when it was suggested to me to share in that way. I found it really really hard to like speak to the camera. I didn't mind if someone was kind of filming me in a way that I was doing something and it was more detached, and but like looking and speaking like this, it was really really hard for me. So it's been a long, a beautiful process, but not something that I consciously ever attempted to do. It happened by itself,
Mm.
organically.
But you enjoy it now, right?
I've enjoyed
Yeah,
it
yeah,
from
yeah.
the beginning.
Right.
Yeah,
What
it's
changed? I mean, what
it's
made you more public facing? Right? How does that evolve then? Because I mean, you have a great social media presence, let's say.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest thing was when I started teaching, I was 21. I was very I didn't think that I could do it. I didn't think that I could stand up and teach. And the wonderful thing about this training at Yoga to the People was that you don't teach your trainees like in a normal, most trainings you teach
Mm.
your trainees. What they do is they make you go and teach a class. Like I told you, all those people in the stairway like waiting to get in, like they just go, okay, now you go and teach that class to like 60 people, and you've never taught a class before. So it was so painfully hard, and it was a lot of tough love with them. It's like you just do it, and they don't like kind of cuddle you. They say whatever comes out, it's fine. Like we trust you. You got this. You're just gonna go teach. And it was like the heart rate and like sweating but cold, hot all at the same time. It was like awful. But I think because I did it, and then I did it again, and I did it again, and I did it again. After a year of doing that, of like just seeing so many people and doing it despite the fear, because the fear was
Mm,
so real, and so
mm,
it wasn't innate to me. Even though, like I said, I grew up in like a very public family. My dad and my mom and dad gave speeches and were social people. I just wasn't like them. And I never thought I was like them. That's why I was like a painter and I was a dancer, because I didn't want to speak. And I found it difficult to speak to people. But something in the love of the practice changed that for me. And I fought really hard to get up and do it. I didn't enjoy it at first, not in the process. Afterwards, I did. I felt
yeah, yeah.
so much love and like light, and what a blessing. But going to teach and trying to teach the class was hard because I didn't feel worthy. And I think a lot of people feel that way. I loved the practice and the knowledge, this knowledge so much. I never felt worthy. But then one thing that one of my first teachers told me really stuck. And she said, "Why are you making it about yourself? You know, it's like it's not about you." And I said, "You're right." That really helped me because I need logic sometimes. And that really helped me because I said, it's not about me. I'm making this whole story about Talia, and what she's going through, and like, who cares, So just let's teach downward facing dog, It's not, let's help this person
Yeah.
breathe. And it's
Mm,
not about me. And that changed my whole life, actually. It was sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes when we have an issue, it takes a very long time to get through the process, to move through the fear, through the anxiety, through the patterns that are so set in. And sometimes, and maybe it takes two of them together, it's like just the light turns on. And
mm.
once you turn the light on, the light is on. And for me, that was that. It's like, it's not about me. I don't care. I don't care if someone thinks I'm not good enough. Okay? Like
Yeah.
I'm probably not ever going to be. And it's fine.
I think that's the way a lot of people get. I reckon that must be the way a lot of people get around it, because that's exactly the same way I got around it. I just couldn't have stood up and been me. It was like I was passing on something that helped me. I just kept that in my mind. It's really helped you. Just try and pass it on, and it'll help other people. And it's exactly the same. Yeah. Right. So I'm assuming then there's a lot of people listening that have the same default mechanism. Along similar lines, and what have your challenges been with the postures? Because I heard another podcast. You mentioning a certain arm balance or something at Dharmamitra's class, and he came along and told you just to do it, and that seemed to work
Yeah.
as well. You seem to respond well to simple phrases. Let's say, if only everyone could be taught and changed in their mindset so easily. But I mean, like, people will see you online and they will see you and they will think, well, she's never struggled in a posture in her life. I mean, you've got this incredible back bend. You also got a good strength of the front body. Must have struggled a lot. Of course, we've all struggled in asana. People would love to know your struggles, I'm sure, just to make you human.
So, just to be clear, right? I'm 35 years old, and I started having a very intense physical discipline at 4 years old.
Mm,
My life has had discipline as long as I can remember. And when I did gymnastics, is because my mom first took me to a ballet class, and I didn't like it because everyone was just running around with ribbons. And I wanted something very serious to do. So when I did gymnastics, it was very intense training. And then I transitioned to classical ballet. And I did classical ballet. I went to a special school where I did my academic work in 4 hours, and the rest of the day I was dancing. And I did this my whole life. Okay, so just to be
mm,
clear, I didn't start physical discipline later in my life. I started very early on. I also took on other things as a child. When I was 11 years old, I became vegetarian without anyone else in my family doing so. I had very specific viewpoints, and I lived a very specific life from a child. So obviously, because of intense physical training from childhood, I already started yoga asana practice from a place that is very established. I had a wealth of body consciousness, strength, flexibility, balance. I was trained for it. I was trained to be a professional dancer. Like, I decided not to do it, doesn't matter. But the point is, that's what I was trained for. So
yeah, that's a
it's
good
important to
disclaimer.
say that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really,
no, yeah, I think it is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
so what you see is the result of a lifetime
Mm,
of work,
mm,
and
mm,
I gave it all of my attention. Now, when I came into asana, some things were very difficult for me. For example, I was never trained to find spinal flexion. And that means there aren't a lot
mm.
of most people don't even know what spinal flexions are, because there aren't a lot of even in most yoga asana sequences, there aren't a lot of head to knee moments, right? So we're doing a lot of extensions, spinal extensions, even in forward folds. Like in Ashtanga, you'll take the chin to
Yeah, I
the
don't teach it
shin,
like that.
right? So we teach, most people know Ashtangis, or even people who go to vinyasa classes, the gaze is forwards, and we're mostly working on the chin to shin connection. And that's fine, but there is another type of spinal movement that's very important, and it's very prevalent in the gauche system, which is forehead to knee and
Mm.
the rounding of the spine, deep active
That was an
rounding.
Ashtanga. I have to say that is an Ashtanga, and I teach like that. And more recently, it's often been this elongated spine. But there's a precedent. If you look at Krishnamacharya, obviously Patabi Joyce, there's a rounding of the spine as well. So there is that flexion. Just want to make sure that anyone who's not in Ashtanga realizes that's there as well. It's, the
But
original flexion of
in
the
the
back is
original,
important.
what postures do you, I'm just really curious, like what postures are there in the primary series that
Janu
would have
Shirshasana.
spine? Okay.
Janu, head to knee. Janu, knee. Shirsha,
Yeah,
head.
John. Yeah,
Yeah,
we have that.
makes sense, doesn't it? Right. Even
Yeah,
Utthita Hasta
but
Padangusthasana, the way that you do it, coming forward. I would teach it more like that. That you would come
yeah, but
forward
the
over the
way
leg
the
more.
teachers, but the way that the teachers teach it is this way,
Well, some teachers, not me,
right? Okay, not
just
you.
because some teachers teach it like
So,
that. I mean, many teachers will teach it with the chin coming forward, even Paschimottanasana with the chin coming forward.
right.
But this is, it's not the way I teach it, and it's not an effective method. So, I mean, the spine, I don't see the spine working that effectively if you keep pulling forward your lower back. And yeah, it's the spine has curves, and you need to respect the curves, and you need the flexion as much as the extension. All you need is this mobility of the spine. We're not looking for even though we've been walking around with a polar paras, you're looking for mobility of the spine, not just elongating all the time. So yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
just defend the
So
corner of Ashtanga a little bit. Yeah.
no,
Carry
because I
on.
think it's
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting, because a posture like Janu Shirshasana, it's interesting because it's in the name, because you have head to
Yes.
knee in the name, but then in some lineages that isn't always, it is by you, but it isn't always instructed that way or understood that way.
No,
Anyway,
not at all. Yeah.
in the
Mm.
Ghosh tradition, it is, and there are several, maybe 5 different instances in the 26 series where the student is asked to curl, to round their spine and place the forehead on the knee. I found that incredibly challenging, like
Oh.
incredibly challenging. I didn't know how to do that. I wasn't trained for that. And just to show that
Mm.
if we are presented with something that is new, that we've never done before, that's going to be a lot more of a struggle. Other things that I struggled with and are still very difficult for me are any kind of very extended, like a handstand with one long line, right? That's going to
Right.
be much more challenging for someone like me, because I have a lot of freedom in my body, and to control that level of freedom, it takes a lot more effort So when something has the greater the mobility
Mm.
in the joints, especially in my spine, the greater the mobility in the joints, the more intense effort it takes to control it. Because if there's less movement in the joint, then it's easier. When there is a lot of movement in the joint, then we need a lot of effort to contain, to create something and to hold it in a straight line. So those things were definitely challenging for me, but I think I enjoy, I think I do enjoy working on something that's difficult, So for me, that's never been an issue
Yeah.
because I
No, I
really
don't
like
think
it.
work has been an issue for you. Yeah, you definitely you definitely seem committed. And along those lines, I mean, you're also quite an advocate of the vegan diet, right? And that's a big part of your message, I think, without being proselytizing, is that the vegan diet works for you, and you're very committed to that. How do you want to say anything about that, or how you came to that, or how that fits in with your view on yoga?
I don't really think of it as a diet, and I don't,
Right.
and I think that's really probably the biggest. I know it's just a word, but for me, it's never
Mm.
been about. Like I said, I became. There wasn't the word vegan when I was 11. It didn't exist. So I knew myself as a vegetarian, but of course, I never had, my family just never had even like milk products. So I never had that in my life. And from a young age, I also was just naturally recoiled at the sight or smell of eggs. So I was vegan essentially, just wasn't, the word didn't exist for it. Uh, it's not something that I would say for me is a diet. So again, I'm 35, 11, I don't know how long. It's been like 24 years, I guess, of living life like this. I think I can verify for myself, but I think it's also verifiable by others. Like people can see that I'm a very strong person,
Mm.
and thankfully I'm very healthy. But
Mm.
again, I think that works. What works for me may not work for anyone else. And for me, it's never, again, it's not a diet. It's just a very natural perception. It's my perception. I just like how for a lot of people, they don't see dogs or cats and want to milk them or eat them. I see the same for the other animals. Like it's just like that for me. I just don't see that as being food. I don't see other animals and think that I should eat them. Um, does it fit in with traditional yogic teachings? Yes. But also, I think in terms of how it is that it is definitely suggested that, from what I understand, that we reduce the level of suffering uh, that we cause. So
Mm.
making an effort to reduce the suffering and to also take in less what's called tamasic foods in terms of diet, because you mentioned the word diet. For me, it's not about diet. It's just the
Mm.
perception. It's how I see the world. And I could just never do it. Even as a kid,
Mm.
when my parents would give me certain foods, I really struggled with eating it. And it didn't fit in with how I wanted
Mm.
to just how I saw the world. And I loved animals. I was a
Mm.
quieter kid. I found solace with animals. I loved animals.
I suppose I'll rephrase the question slightly, because obviously the Himsa diet suggests a vegetarian diet in traditional Indian culture and yoga. That's obviously clear, and even I know that, obviously. But how does it relate to your teaching? I mean, I know, say, for example, David and Sharon at Jivan Mukti are quite strongly there, kind of suggesting this to the students. Obviously it's a belief that's dear to your heart. How do you square that when you have a whole bunch of people want to teach a training and you're in Tuscany with all the prosciutto and, all this stuff, around? I mean, you see people, kind of doing these things, how do you keep your mouth shut, or do you suggest any?
Oh, no. Our
No.
trainings, before people even sign up to our training, they know that it's a fully vegan training. So there is no other option. So if you want other options, it's probably not the right fit to come to a Love and All is Coming training. So before you even sign up, it'll say, this is a fully vegan training. That's it's definitely a tenet. I don't try and preach diet to anyone, but in the training, it is a vegan training. There's also no smoking, no alcohol. Uh, there's a code of conduct that we have within our manual that everyone agrees to before coming. So nothing is a surprise. But yeah, we follow certain rules. We go to sleep at a certain time. We follow silence in the mornings. And we do all of this based on both my personal experiences and practices that have helped me and that I find useful for most humans. And even simple things, trainees have to make their beds. They have to make their bed in the morning. Yeah. So
Do you,
we
do you check?
follow
Do you check
certain
on them?
rules. I don't, but
I can
someone else
imagine you
does.
going around with a clipboard saying, "No, no, go back." That's not
We do have an assistant for that.
Well, I realise I'm running out of time just chatting to you, really, but it's been quite enjoyable. What about? I mean, I'm looking at other questions I've got, and I've got many for you. But what about motherhood? Because I know you've become a mother a few years ago. Many people struggle with keeping up a practice during motherhood. The changes that makes on the female body are obvious. How has it affected you, and how do you fit in practice now? Coping. I know your son's very young, so how does this all work out around
Yeah.
yoga now?
I have two kids. My son is almost 6, and my daughter is 1 and almost 3 months. So I never wanted kids. It was never a part of one thing I really knew in life was I was never going to have kids. Also because I was trained to be a dancer, I was always like clear to me. I was like, my body, like nothing's getting in the way. Like I'm not doing this. I'm not getting married, and I'm not like having a family. So that was also definitely a surprise. But I don't think I'm very resistant when like something comes in my life with joy. I really do tend to open up to it. And when I met Ezra, things changed for me that were different. Like I left my life in New York. I moved to Jerusalem. Like why on earth am I even doing this? I left a very awesome and exciting life that I love. Like I said, I love teaching all the classes and being a part of my community and beginning to expand and grow. But I left all of it in a second because I felt something. I felt something inside that was very clear. It was very clear, and I left. I left it. I said it's fine. I moved to Jerusalem. It was a very strange couple of years in terms of what I was doing with my life. I kind of retired for 2 years. I stopped teaching. From teaching all the time, I almost never taught unless I was filming classes. It just wasn't happening. And then we had kids, and of course life changes. Life is going to change whether someone has kids or not, and our bodies will change whether we have kids or not. We don't have to be a woman that's having kids to know this. So like hopefully we all know that our bodies will change, and are changing second by second. It's just the fact. So even if I chose not to have kids, I would still be faced with change and the change in my body. I decided to have kids because I felt deeply inside of me that this was the right thing, that this is something that I wanted to do. And of course, practice changes. And luckily, I'm interested in more than just asana practice and always have been. I think also I can attribute this to years of discipline, physical discipline prior to asana practice as well. So very early on, I was also very much interested in philosophy and studying and chanting. I spent a lot of my time studying Sanskrit, chanting the sutras. I'm interested. There's so much more that is there, but I also involved my kids. I involved my kids in a lot of my practice. And of course it changes, but I spent so many years being so disciplined that, my body doesn't necessarily require so much asana. I am able to access my body has access to asana without much effort, to be completely just honest here. My body has access to asana without necessarily constant physical practice. I don't need to do a lot. But of course,
Was it hard to adapt from a really disciplined kind of practice and lifestyle to what you have now and you're a mother with 2 kids? Is there
not
any struggles
really.
around that? No.
Not. I mean, the struggle was in perception, but you have time when you're pregnant. So
That's what
pregnancy,
I
luckily,
mean. How did it? Yeah, mentally.
it takes 10 months. You have like 10 months to begin to process all of these changes. Things are going to happen. And I think because I also as a child was like, I'm not going to have kids because I know what they do. I'm not disillusioned. They're going to really mess things up. And I knew about this. I didn't live in this fantasy where like I was going to have kids. I didn't even want kids. So then when it happened, I was very grounded, and I think I was ready to give that, to surrender what I knew before. Like I did it when I was ready. If I felt like struggle, and I wouldn't have done it. I would have said, no, I'm not ready to let go of my practices. Then it would be a struggle because I would resent my choice. But I made the choice. I made the choice when I was at a peaceful place of surrendering to that. So I wasn't resentful. I'm not resentful because I did it at the right time, and I did it when I wanted to. So there was no resentment. And also, I live still a very disciplined life, and I enjoy introducing discipline to my children, meaning the love of certain practices and living life a certain way. And so the practice is not just your posture that you're doing or the 90 minutes that you set up for your practice. I see it in everything I do. So in the way, like I said, the way I arrange my home, and the way that I take care of my home, and the way that we speak to each other in my home, and the standard that I hold up for our relationships. That is a practice, and it's a major practice. So we're taking it out of just it's a practice when I say it is, and we're expanding it to life itself. So that's the potential of yoga. Yoga can be a practice, it can be a goal, and it can also be an embodiment and a lived experience. And I think
So,
this is what can happen over time, is that we see that we can establish it in everything we do. It doesn't matter. You can take any action you want, and the way that it's done internally is what makes it conscious, what makes it a part of the practice.
Well, it sounds like the only struggle has really been flexion, spinal flexion. Everything else has flowed quite nicely. It's wonderful to hear. What is your biggest accomplishment? What do you think? Well, could you say one thing that is, apart from the children, obviously you have to say the children, but anything else in your teaching or your life that you think that you're really pleased with?
I think, the fact that I was and am able to continue to offer about 3 trainings a year. Each one of them is about 2 or sometimes 3 weeks long, and be a present parent. The fact that I'm able to live a life that I love with a partner that I love, and never feel that there's anything that I'm neglecting in my own development. I continue to study with my teachers. Every day I make time for my own personal studies, for my practices, for my children, and for my students, and for the trainings that I lead. So I think all of that is something that I feel gives me peace, because I feel fulfilled. I feel that every day I am doing what I'm meant to do, but mostly I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful that life has aligned itself in a certain way, and that I was receptive to it. And there have been many more struggles than just spinal flexions, but I don't choose necessarily to dwell on them, because like I said before, it's not about me. It's not about me. And that's not where I dwell about what happened to
Mm,
me and how I'm, suffering is a choice, because there
mm,
are always challenges in my life. Always. There are
mm,
always challenges in our lives, but
mm.
suffering is an internal condition that can be solved. And I can choose how I choose to see something is up to me. So I don't choose, even if there are challenges happening, I don't choose to
Yeah.
be a victim. I don't choose to be resentful. I want to use them to meet myself and to see what I'm capable of. And I am going to draw that back to the way that my mom faced her challenges. And when doctors told her she had, a few months to live, she even then never ever lost sight of the joy of living. And I have that in me, luckily. Who knows? Maybe it's something that is from just this lifetime with my mom. Maybe it's from even further, deep, deeper in. But either way, I'm connected to something beautiful, obviously. I'm connected to something good and beautiful and truthful, and that's what I stay connected to, not the narratives about myself and my challenges. So I'm connected to a power that is greater than that. I feel that very much, and I think that's what fuels. That's what allows me to stay focused and centered, and and
Mm.
and my and allow my mind and heart to focus on things that are really bigger than just me, me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, just for the record, I wasn't 1 minute saying that you haven't had suffering in life, as we all had suffering in life, haven't we? But you've had, you do have a wonderful presence, and I haven't met you in person, but I see what you're doing, and everything looks just so nice, and then the retreats look really, really well done, and really joyful, and obviously you've got a lovely practice, and yeah, it looks like things are flowing nicely for you. Well, how would you see yourself in the next 10 years? Is there any goals that you've got?
I just don't know. I'm
Right,
always so
right.
surprised, because 10 years
Yeah.
ago I would have never imagined being here. So I just never know. I
Mm,
tend to just focus on what I'm doing now, and we'll see where it goes. I could have never imagined this life that I'm living now. I never would have. Never in a million years. I wouldn't even believe it, that I would be living in Tel Aviv and have like two kids. I would be like, I would be sick if you told me that. To be honest, I'd be like just so concerned. I would be so
oh,
concerned.
yeah, so concerned for yourself. That's funny.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
have
I would just
there's a
say,
whole
what
other
happened?
story about how you got together with your partners. A whole other story. That's a great podcast. I can't remember the lady who interviewed you on that on the relationship podcast, but that was a really good story. If you've got time to listen to Talia's introduction to her husband, that's wonderful and serendipitous kind of events. Anyway, what was I going to say? Last thing I think I'm kind of been kind of circling around in my mind is like you've got a lot of integrity and you hold yourself to a very high standards, and I can see that just from talking to you. How do you square that and keep that, knowing that along the lines of yoga and money, like how do you deal with that aspect of what is a kind of something which is definitely a vocation for you, but it's also a profession, right? Yeah, you're doing it professionally, and also the isolation that you must face. You're very popular on social media, and obviously with your students as well. They, that kind of quote unquote potential power that you have. How do you keep your line with these challenges or influences or potential influences upon you?
Well,
Last question.
in terms of the first part of your question, uh,
Mm,
I think it's important to when taking on when living a life that's centered around the practice, then we have to know, okay, what kind of person am I? Because there are guidelines. If you're looking for traditional guidelines, there are traditional guidelines. So, a householder,
mm,
yogis would have different, are given different goals, life goals traditionally. Uh, and it's actually a responsibility of a householder, right, to provide for their family. And there is no problem providing for a family and setting up a house, and also practicing and teaching yoga. And we've seen this, historically, and also can see it simply from traditional teachings that are really, it's really amazing how prevalent they are even now to look at. So if we're looking, for example, at the traditional 4 goals of life for a householder, you'll see that it's very simple. There are certain things that a person needs to fulfill in their lifetime. So I think that for me, that has really helped. Also working with teachers, asking questions that come up for me in terms of ethics, because that does come up for me, like what's ethical and what isn't. And that does shift as perception changes. But at the end of the day, I always come back to, am I making a choice out of fear? Am I making a choice, a decision out of external judgments or influences? And if the answer is yes, then I don't make that decision, or I try to slow down what I'm doing. I think it takes discernment. Discernment is something that is developed with time in a practice. And when you do practice for a long time, and this is something that naturally happens because it's hard to discern. Sometimes it seems like, oh, it should be easy to discern between the right and the wrong, but it isn't. Sometimes it's very hard. And the thing that makes it most difficult is if we're very impressionable, and if we are likely to seek certain validation from people around us. Luckily, I don't really, like I said, over time, it took years. So obviously, this is not something that I just was born with. But over many years of practice, because I've made it less about Talia, the person, and more about what it is that I wanted to share, the yoga, the practice, then less and less also I feel like I need to please other people, or to other people's validation. And I think when that happens, then things are becoming more clear. And when I do have a doubt, I have a teacher or teachers that I can consult with on what it is that maybe I'm having a dilemma with. But there is the way that I see it, there is no problem. There is no problem living a life of a yogi, and also having a family and being a householder and making sure that kids are provided for, and that everyone is good. They're set up for whatever they need to do. Like, I don't see a conflict as long as, again, things are done consciously and ethically. I care about ethics. I do the best that I can to minimize the amount of harm and suffering that we cause. But again, it's obviously it's going to be so relative, because people are going to have different opinions and standards on what that is. So you can remind me of the second part of the question. I don't remember what it was.
No, I think that was, I think that's pretty much answered it. I don't doubt for a minute that you have utter integrity, or you try your best. I mean, you can't always win it, kind of like get it right every time, but
but I mean, I guess for people, because I'm sure you have a lot of people watching who are teachers and maybe starting out, and I think it can be really confusing, and I think it's important to know your value, because I definitely did it. When I was starting out and I was teaching all those classes, I was being paid maybe $30 a class for years and years. That's what I was being paid, and I was living in New York City, so it was really hard. I didn't have anything. It was really, really hard for me, but financially. But I was so happy, and because it was just me, it was fine. But that wouldn't work. That kind of lifestyle wouldn't work with kids, and sending kids to school and hiring help when we need it, and obviously all of the things that are needed when you have a family. That kind of lifestyle doesn't work. So obviously things changed. For me, it changed organically, but also I was open to it. And I think that a person has to be receptive to that. So when people came in and helped me, because my friends set me up with all types of people who knew things about finance and social media that I didn't know, and those people helped me along the way. I was open to receive help. When someone said, you know what, you should speak to this person, they could help you, my reaction wasn't, oh, no, I don't need help, or I'm not interested in a good contract. I didn't say that. I said, oh, okay. yeah, I'll hear what they have to say. Why not? You know, and that took me places because I was always open. So when someone suggested something, I was open to learning more. And I think that's always a good attitude to have. And not, and if you're a teacher and you want to also make a living out of this, I think you should know that's perfectly fine and it's a good thing. You should be able to have spiritual development as well as physical material development. You should be well established. A yogi who's a householder should be well established enough that they don't have to worry. Their consciousness isn't in survival mode. You shouldn't have to
Mm,
worry about, if you want to develop as a teacher, you need to have your foundations very strong, and that includes your material security. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it's good to understand your value as a teacher, and maybe get help if you struggle with that, like I did. Get help from people who are professionals, and they can help you present yourself or create contracts that work to ensure that you are set up long term for success in the business side of things.
mm, yeah, well, that's an excellent end note to finish the interview with, and really helpful for many people, I think. Yeah, very inspiring. Well, all that remains is me to say thank you very much for your time, Talia. It's been a pleasure to finally chat with you, and I know that everyone's going to find this podcast really interesting. So thanks again from everyone, from all of us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much, Adam.